Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The Molly Bish case. Molly Bish was born on August 2, 1983, in Warren, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 3 children in the Bish family. With her siblings Heather and John Jr., Molly was a bright, responsible, and dearly loved and active girl. The Bish family originally hailed from Detroit, Michigan, but they moved to Massachusetts in search of a better future. The reason for their relocation was a disturbing crime that occurred in their Detroit neighborhood. A young woman had been kidnapped on her way home from work and later found murdered. The Bish couple thought Warren would be a much safer place to raise their children, and this seemed to hold true for the next 15 years. Molly, always seeking new activities, had taken a summer job as a lifeguard at Commons Pond in Warren. She was excited about this opportunity as it was her brother John Jr.'s former job, and he had requested that Molly be given the chance to continue in his place. Molly was fully committed to her job and wanted to perform it to the best of her ability to make her brother proud. On June 26, 2000, Magi accompanied Molly to the pond for her 7th day of work. When they arrived at the parking lot, Magi noticed a strange man. He was smoking a cigarette and sitting in a new white car. His presence made her uncomfortable. She looked at him, but he didn't acknowledge her. Magi accompanied Molly to her lifeguard station and stayed a little longer, hoping the man would be gone when she returned to the parking lot. However, when she got back to her vehicle, the stranger was still there. They locked eyes for several seconds, and fearing for Molly's safety, Magi waited inside her car for several minutes until the unknown man finally left. On June 27, 2000, Molly's 8th day on the job, she and her mother stopped at a local store just before 10 in the morning. Molly purchased everything she needed for her shift as a lifeguard. When they arrived at the isolated pond surrounded by mostly woods, Magi dropped off her daughter, who hurried to her station since she was running a bit late. Molly arrived a few minutes later at her station and quickly set up her chair, towel, and all her work equipment, just after 10 in the morning. Swimming lessons were scheduled to begin soon, and she wanted everything in order to welcome the children. The beach was officially open, but Molly was alone, and it seemed that everyone was running late that day. No houses overlooked the water, and the beach wasn't visible from the road, which was located at the end of a dead-end street. In all directions, there were only trees. At 10 in the morning, Sandra and her children arrived to set up camp, followed by other families. They looked around for Molly but couldn't find her at her workstation. That morning, Molly hadn't used her police radio, which was part of her daily routine. Besides the open first aid kit, there was nothing to indicate that she had been engaged in any activities there. Even her shoes were neatly placed in front of her chair. When swimming lessons ended, one of the parents contacted Park Commissioner to report that Molly had disappeared, as it was uncharacteristic of her to leave her workstation unattended. The Park Commissioner arrived at the beach shortly after 11 in the morning, and at 11:44, he used his two-way radio to inform the police that the young girl had not shown up. He also examined her personal belongings left at the scene. From that point onward, some irregular events occurred that raised suspicions. At some point between noon and the afternoon, he ran into John Jr. at a hardware store, and for an unknown reason, He didn't mention that Molly had disappeared. Another irregularity was that the police didn't contact Molly's mother until 1 in the afternoon, 3 hours after Magi had dropped her off at her new job. Part of the reason for the delay, according to some accounts, was that people thought Molly might have gotten a ride to visit a friend, which was a logical assumption considering she had left her belongings by her workstation. Alarmed after receiving the call about her daughter's absence, the mother hurried to the location, where she found Molly's sandals, chair, first aid kit, radio, and lunch by the shore. However, there was no sign of her. Hours later, after the scene of the disappearance, and any potential evidence had been trampled by beachgoers, children, dogs, and curious onlookers who roamed freely, the police realized that their initial assessments might have been wrong. The first theory that Molly had simply gone off with friends made sense for an ordinary teenager, but not for someone as responsible as she was. So, the second theory gained strength, suggesting that Molly had drowned in the pond. At that moment, it seemed the most plausible explanation. It's worth noting that Warren was the kind of small town where nothing much happened, and there were no records of violent crimes. With its picturesque houses and natural beauty, it seemed like a safe place to raise a family. In fact, that was the reason the Bish couple had moved there in the first place. Police investigation began with the basics, analyzing the teenager's belongings and work tools, and something chilling occurred. The unknown man became a suspect because all witnesses saw how he touched and examined everything within his reach upon arriving at the disappearance scene, without gloves or care. Magi informed officers that she had seen a mysterious man lurking around the pond in the days before. With this information, the county sheriff's office initiated an investigation. The local worker testified that he had seen the same man in the white sit-in, but he didn't see him in Molly's worksite parking lot. The car was parked near a nearby cemetery that was connected to the pond by a short path. On the morning of June 27, the day of Molly's disappearance, a truck was unloading sand for the beach. In the investigation, the truck driver was questioned, and he reported seeing the man parked in the lot a few minutes before Magi and Molly arrived. Police officers searched the pond and the surrounding woods but couldn't find Molly. Although there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, both the police and her family were convinced she had been abducted. The police focused their investigation on the unknown man in the white car, based on descriptions provided by Magi, and the two witnesses. A composite sketch of the man was created and circulated. He was described as a man with brown hair, dark eyes, and approximately 50 years old, possibly a heavy smoker since everyone who saw him mentioned he had a cigarette in hand. Simultaneously, a thorough investigation was launched, including the examination of local sex offenders to identify any matching the suspect's description, but no identification was made. The investigation into Molly's case became the largest and most costly search for a missing person ever conducted in the state of Massachusetts. The abduction gained significant notoriety and extensive media coverage. Following Molly's forced absence, her family created a website to spread awareness of the case to a broader audience. They also established an email chain to reach as many people as possible. Over 30,000 U.S. residents received emails about her disappearance. In 2001, Magi reached out to the renowned sketch artist, who agreed to create a composite sketch of Molly's abductor. The two met at a place, which are private accommodations in both rural and urban settings that offer bed and breakfast at rates lower than local hotels. They spent 9 hours chatting while they worked on the composite sketch. When it was completed, Magi felt it was accurate, except for one detail. She requested the artist to update the drawing to include a cigarette in the man's hand. The next day, when the artist showed her the updated result, Maggie was certain that the composite sketch was identical to the man she had seen. In May 2003, a hunter reported finding a blue swimsuit. He contacted the police because he had seen information about Molly's case and knew that she had been wearing a blue swimsuit when she disappeared. This lead turned out to be of great significance, and an intensive search in the forest began immediately. Tracking efforts, involving experts of various kinds, continued for several years. Finally, on June 9, 2003, Molly's body was discovered a little over 8 kilometers from her home. The official cause of death was not disclosed, but it was known that she had been murdered and buried in the dense vegetation on Whiskey Hill. The police continued their relentless efforts to find the person responsible, not just for the kidnapping, but for Molly's homicide. However, the case quickly went cold. In 2005, a man with a striking resemblance to the composite sketch was considered a suspect in an attempted kidnapping, but he couldn't be linked to Molly's case. In 2007, a registered sex offender was identified after attempting to abduct and assault a jogger just a few kilometers from Warren. He also matched the description of the suspect, but the police didn't press charges, and the reasons were never made public. In 2009, Rodney Stanger, who had recently been convicted of murder, became the prime suspect in Molly's abduction and murder. He had lived just a few kilometers from the town where Molly resided and moved to Florida shortly after her disappearance. Rodney also drove a white car, frequently fished at Commons Pond, and was an avid hunter in the area where Molly's body was found. He also fit the description that Molly's mother had provided to the police of the man she saw in a white sit-in. However, Rodney was never charged in the case as the police couldn't establish beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the perpetrator. After this significant setback, the case went cold once again. In November 2011, a confidential informant, who had been providing information to the Special Operations Group, became the new suspect. The individual, identified as Gerald Battistoni, attempted suicide while in prison after learning that he was considered a person of interest in Molly's case. Gerald also lived in the area where the teenager disappeared and had an extensive criminal record dating back to the 1980s. His DNA was analyzed in Texas, where he was serving his sentence, but the man passed away in November 2014 and was not charged with the crime. In June 2016, it was announced that enhanced DNA testing would be applied to 24 samples that had not yet been analyzed. A year later, in June 2017, investigators claimed to have found compelling information in the case. This information led them to a campground where the car allegedly used in Molly's abduction was supposedly buried. Multiple areas of interest were identified using ground-penetrating radar. The information was related to a new suspect who had lived at the campground around the time of Molly's abduction. At that time, he owned a white car similar to the one seen in the pond's parking lot. A witness stated that the man had told him something bad had happened and that he had been in the woods all night when Molly disappeared. He also reportedly had bloodshot scratches on his face. However, the man denied any involvement in the case, and it's unclear whether anything incriminating was found during the 2017 search. In 2019, new tests were conducted using more advanced technology in the hope of obtaining additional data to analyze the case's evidence. Investigators were hopeful that they could obtain a DNA profile with the new procedures, but the wheels of justice would once again turn slowly for Molly. On June 3, 2021, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced that Francis P. Sumner Sr. was a new person of interest in the case. According to reports at the time, it was not possible to arrest him because he had been found dead in his home 5 years earlier. However, the police received a verifiable lead that Francis was involved in Molly's disappearance. Because the investigation is still ongoing, authorities cannot provide many details about the case against Francis, but his criminal history is part of the reason he became a suspect. He had amassed a long list of crimes during his life and had served concurrent sentences for multiple abuses against women in the area where Molly worked. Police had received several tips about him over the years, and this time, the information given in the tips could be corroborated and verified. Francis had been convicted of kidnapping and raping a young woman who had gone to his auto repair shop in 1981. He was released on parole in 1998, just 2 years before Molly's disappearance. He lived not far from where Molly disappeared. He also resembled the composite sketch of the suspect. Unfortunately, He died in 2016 without facing charges in the case. Investigators continue to seek more information about him. When the existence of a new suspect was announced, the Bish family granted several interviews. Molly's older sister, Heather, told a media outlet that she believed investigators were doing everything possible with the information about the new suspect. As part of the effort to determine Francis's involvement, the police went to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample from his son, who was serving a federal prison sentence. This would enable them to conduct DNA analysis to establish a match with the deceased offender. Heather stated that someone like Francis, a convicted sex offender and rapist, should have been on the sex offender registry. This would have allowed them to approach him in the early stages of the investigation, and perhaps the case could have been closed with less trauma for everyone involved. In the same interview, Molly's sister pointed out that the conclusion of the investigation, which has spanned decades, would bring peace to her family. While they will always miss Molly, at least they won't have to keep trying to figure out who was responsible for her absence. Molly Bish's disappearance sparked the largest search for a missing person in the history of the state of Massachusetts. As of 2023, the case remains unresolved. The family believes they are nearing the end of the search for the culprit, although they are also aware that there is a very high likelihood that there may never be complete closure. Her killer has not yet been apprehended, but the case remains open, and the investigation is ongoing. A reward of $100,000 is still being offered for information leading to a definitive resolution. Molly's disappearance has turned her parents into staunch advocates for child safety. They hope that through their efforts, they can prevent other children from becoming victims of predators. Well, that's all for today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video. It will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.